The wind howled like a symphony of madness, carrying sheets of rain that pounded against the glass windows of Oak Ridge Haven Veterinary Clinic like invisible fists, demanding to tear through anything in their path. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the sterile scent of disinfectant mingling with the faint, pitiful whimpers of an injured cat in a steel cage. Dr. Rachel Bennett, her hands trembling after 14 relentless hours straddling the line between life and death for her helpless patients, had just signed off on the final report of the night. Her white lab coat was stained with dried blood and clumps of fur, tangible evidence of the unyielding battle she fought daily in the emergency ward. Outside, the town of Oak Ridge, Oregon, lay shrouded in the worst storm of the decade, a raging fury of nature that the locals whispered was a curse from the past. Rachel had barely set her pen down, reaching to turn off the old desk lamp, when the front door burst open with a deafening bang, as if the storm itself had forced its way in. A gust of icy wind swept through, carrying with it the soaked figure of Tom Carver, the town's animal control officer. He nearly collapsed, his strong arms clutching a tattered cloth bundle, drenched in rain. "Dr. Bennett?" Tom's voice was hoarse, nearly drowned by the roar of the wind. "I know it's late, but the shelter is over capacity. If no one takes it in by morning?" He trailed off, his red-rimmed eyes betraying a desperation that needed no further explanation. In Oak Ridge, by morning meant a cold, clinical end via syringe. Rachel stepped forward, her heart pounding as Tom peeled back the soaked fabric. Staring back at her were the deepest brown eyes she had ever seen, not eyes filled with fear but an ancient sorrow, as if the German Shepherd pup carried the weight of a century's grief. Its black and tan fur was matted with rain, its frail 4-month-old body trembling, not from the cold but from something else. Something unnatural. There was an eerie knowingness in its gaze, as though it understood something she had yet to grasp. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the room in a stark white glow. Rachel's breath hitched as the flash revealed a weathered leather collar around the pup's neck, almost hidden beneath its thick fur. "Let me see," she murmured, her fingers trembling as she traced the worn material. The collar was frayed, nearly falling apart, but her skilled hands could feel the faint etchings of an inscription. Tilting it toward the light, she read the words, and her blood ran cold. "If found, return me home, 1723 Pine Hollow Lane." That address. That name. 15 years ago, a devastating fire had consumed the house at 1723 Pine Hollow Lane, claiming the lives of the Dawson family, a father, mother, and their 12-year-old son, all lost in the inferno that raged through the night. But the most haunting part of the tragedy was the disappearance of the youngest child, 6-year-old Lucy Dawson. She had vanished without a trace amidst the flames. Some believed she had perished unseen, but others swore her spirit still roamed the woods nearby, a ghost story whispered among Oak Ridge's children on stormy nights. Rachel's eyes snapped up to meet Tom's. "Where did you find it?" Her voice was sharp, interrogative. Tom wiped the rain from his face, his breath uneven. "Near the western edge of the forest, about 3 miles outside town. It was just standing there, howling like it was calling for someone. I spent an hour trying to catch it, but it kept running in circles, like it didn't want to leave. In the end, I had to use a net." He hesitated, his expression flickering with unease. "Rachel, there's something wrong with this dog. It's not like the others I've seen. When I touched it, I felt this cold, like someone was watching me from behind." His words made the room feel suddenly smaller, the air heavier. Rachel turned back to the pup. It didn't whimper, didn't bark, just watched her in silence, its eyes deep and unfathomable. A chill ran down her spine, not from the storm outside, but from the unshakable feeling that this dog hadn't simply wandered here by chance. She recalled an old town rumor, that Max, the Dawson family's loyal German shepherd, had barked frantically the night of the fire, trying to warn them but had failed. Max had disappeared along with Lucy, and some swore that on stormy nights, they could still hear his howls echoing from the woods. "Leave it here," Rachel finally said, her voice steadier than her racing heartbeat. "I'll keep it overnight." Tom exhaled, relieved to rid himself of the burden, though suspicion still lingered in his eyes as he left, closing the door behind him. The wind outside seemed to quiet, giving way to an unsettling stillness. Rachel knelt beside the pup, placing a hand on its damp fur. Its heartbeat was steady, but slow, unnaturally so. Suddenly, it lifted its head and locked eyes with her, releasing a low, mournful howl, not the cry of a puppy but a sound ancient and sorrowful, a plea from beyond the veil of time. At that moment, the overhead lights flickered wildly, and from the shadows of the room, Rachel heard a faint whisper, a child's voice barely more than a breath. "Take me home." She jerked around, her skin crawling. But there was no one there. Just her and the dog. Her pulse pounded, cold sweat forming despite the room's unnatural warmth. The pup tilted its head, waiting. And Rachel knew with terrifying certainty, this was no ordinary rescue. The collar, the address, those eyes, they were pieces of a long-buried mystery. And whether she wanted to or not, she had just stepped into its center. The next morning, when the gray dawn finally broke through the stormy sky, Rachel drove toward the ruins of 1723 Pine Hollow Lane. The house had long since been reduced to an overgrown lot, its scorched remains barely visible beneath the tangled grass. Beside her in the passenger seat, the pup sat still, its gaze never leaving her. As she pulled up, an elderly woman emerged from the house next door, Edith Harper, one of Oakridge's oldest residents. "You're the vet, aren't you?" Edith's voice was frail yet sharp. Rachel nodded and held up the collar. "I found this on a stray. Do you know anything about the Dawson family?" Edith took the collar, her gnarled hands trembling as she read the engraving. "Dear God," she whispered, her eyes clouded with memory. "This belonged to Max, Lucy's dog. He never left her side, not even that night." She recounted the fire, how it had erupted past midnight, how Lucy's mother had screamed before being swallowed by the blaze, and how Max had howled, desperate to save them. "They never found Lucy," Edith murmured. "But a few years ago, on nights like this, I swore I heard a dog howling from the woods. I thought it was Max. Still looking for her." A chill settled in Rachel's bones. She turned to the pup, now standing by the car door, ears perked, listening. Then, without warning, it lifted its head and howled, a long, haunting cry that cut through the misty morning air. Rachel didn't know how, but she understood. This dog hadn't come here by chance. It carried a secret, and whether she was ready or not, that secret was about to be revealed. The storm had subsided, leaving Oakridge shrouded in thick fog, as if the town were trying to conceal its secrets beneath the cold mist. Inside Oakridge Haven Veterinary Clinic, the dim fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting a pale glow on the small German shepherd curled up in the corner of the kennel. Its deep brown eyes never left Rachel Bennett, silently challenging her, urging her to dig deeper into the mystery hinted at by the old collar. Rachel sat at her desk, her thumb running over the engraved words, "If found, take me home, 1723 Pine Hollow Lane." Each time she read it, a chill crawled down her spine as if someone, or something, was whispering from the shadows. She hadn't slept last night. The pup's howling, the strange noises when she was alone with it, replayed in her mind like a broken record. She had rummaged through old files in the office, searching for any clue about the Dawson family. An aged, crumpled article from the Oakridge Chronicle dated 2010 recounted the fire. The blaze erupted at 1:47 a.m. on August 13, consuming the two-story wooden house in under 20 minutes. The parents, Helen and Mark Dawson, and their 12-year-old son Ethan, were trapped in the inferno. But Lucy, their 6-year-old daughter with golden hair and a radiant smile in the accompanying family photo, had vanished. No trace. No body. Only her loyal German shepherd, Max, had disappeared with her, like a ghost. Rachel stood up and approached the kennel, locking eyes with the pup. "You know something, don't you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. The dog tilted its head, ears perked up, then suddenly let out a low, prolonged howl, an eerie sound that carried the weight of sorrow, of memory, as if it were calling someone from beyond the grave. The clinic lights flickered again and Rachel felt a draft snake through the room, though all the windows were shut tight. She stepped back, her heartbeat hammering in her chest as the pup rose to its feet, pressing closer to the bars, its gaze unwavering. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, though she knew no answer would come, at least not in words. At that moment, the clinic's doorbell rang, slicing through her frantic thoughts. Rachel turned, breath catching in her throat as the door creaked open, revealing a slender, rain-soaked figure under the dim morning light. A young woman about 21 with damp, dark blonde hair clinging to her face, her green eyes filled with hesitation. "I heard he was here," she said, her voice trembling. "The dog. I found him last week, but I couldn't keep him." Rachel frowned, studying her. "Who are you?" "Sarah Jennings," the girl replied, stepping inside, leaving a trail of water on the floor. "I work at the construction office on Elm Street. I found him wandering near my apartment complex. I wanted to keep him, but my landlord doesn't allow pets. I brought him here last night, but—" She hesitated, clutching the strap of her bag. "I can't stop thinking about him. Something about him feels strange." A chill ran down Rachel's spine. "Strange how?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze flickering around the room before settling on the kennel. "He just looked at me. Like he knew me. And last night when I slept, I dreamed of fire. A burning house. I heard a child crying, and a dog howling. I woke up gasping like it wasn't just a dream." Sarah's words hit Rachel like a hammer. She led Sarah to the kennel, watching the dog's reaction. As Sarah approached, the pup sprang up, tail wagging slightly, then made a sound, half bark, half howl, as if trying to speak. Sarah stepped back, pressing a hand to her chest, her face pale. "Oh God," she whispered. "I heard that sound. In my dream." Rachel's head spun. She opened the kennel, letting the pup out. It ran straight to Sarah, jumping up, placing its front paws on her legs, licking her hands as if recognizing her from another life. Sarah knelt, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't understand," she murmured. "I only met him last week. How can this be?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She knelt beside Sarah, checking the collar again. The words were still there, clearer in the morning light. "If found, take me home, 1723 Pine Hollow Lane." She looked at Sarah, a wild thought forming. "How old are you?" she asked, tension thick in her voice. Sarah blinked, confused. 21. "Why?" Rachel did the math. "The fire happened 15 years ago. Lucy Dawson vanished at 6 years old. If she had survived, she'd be 21 now. Do you remember anything about your childhood?" Rachel pressed, her heart pounding. Sarah frowned, wiping her tears. "Not much. I grew up in foster care. They told me I was in a car accident when I was 7, that I lost my memory from head trauma. I don't remember anything before that." She hesitated, looking at the dog nuzzling her hand. "But sometimes I dream of strange things. Fire, smoke, and a dog like him." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. She stood up abruptly, rushed to her desk, and pulled out the family photo from the old article. She handed it to Sarah. "Look at this. Do you recognize anyone?" Sarah took the photo, her hands trembling. She stared at the faces: Helen, Mark, Ethan, and Lucy, the little girl with golden hair and a bright smile, standing next to a German shepherd identical to the pup before her. For a long moment she was silent, her breathing growing uneven. I don't know," she finally said, her voice unsteady. "But this girl? I feel like I've seen her before." Rachel didn't miss the way Sarah's voice cracked on the last word. She sat down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, I think this dog is tied to a mystery from 15 years ago. The fire at Pine Hollow Lane. A little girl named Lucy Dawson went missing that night. She would be your age now." She paused, locking eyes with Sarah. "I'm not sure, but you might be Lucy." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock and fear. "What? No, that's impossible. I'm Sarah Jennings." She stopped, clutching her head as if something buried deep inside was trying to surface. The pup howled again, the sound resonating like an echo from the past. Just then Rachel's phone rang, shattering the tension. She picked up, and Tom Carver's panicked voice came through. "Rachel, do you still have that dog? Something weird just came up. A friend at the police station told me they found fresh dog tracks near Pine Hollow Lane this morning, like it was there last night. Rachel's pulse skipped. She looked at Sarah, then at the pup. "Tom," she said, her voice shaky. "I think we've uncovered something far bigger than we ever imagined. Meet me at the clinic. Bring any files you can find on the Dawson fire." As she hung up, Sarah stood, clutching the pup as if it were her only lifeline. "If I'm Lucy," she whispered, "why don't I remember? And who kept me hidden all these years?" Rachel had no answers, but she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The pup lifted its head and howled once more. From somewhere within the clinic, a soft sound stirred, a faint, unmistakable noise. The whisper of small footsteps on the empty wooden floor. Rachel turned sharply, but no one was there. Just her, Sarah, and the dog, along with the ghosts of a past that refused to rest. Nightfall draped Oakridge in an impenetrable darkness, broken only by the flickering headlights of Rachel Bennett's SUV as it sped down the winding country roads toward Pineview Care Center, 40 miles north of town. Inside the vehicle, the air was heavy, suffocating, filled only with Sarah Jennings' ragged breathing and the soft whimpering of the German shepherd curled up in the back seat, now called Max, a name that had surfaced from the depths of her subconscious without explanation. Clutching the Dawson family photo Rachel had given her, Sarah ran trembling fingers over the image of little Lucy, beaming beside the original Max. "If I'm her," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking, "why am I here alive while they're all dead?" Rachel didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. This morning's phone call from Edith Harper had upended everything. The elderly woman had shakily recounted that Tom Carver had reached out to an old acquaintance at the fire department, uncovering a buried detail about the Dawson fire. Jake Sullivan, Mark Dawson's brother and a former volunteer firefighter in Oakridge, had been present at the scene that night but never reported back after the flames were extinguished. Official records listed him as missing in the fire, but no body was ever found. Edith was certain Jake was alive, and that the man known as John Mason at Pineview Care Center was him, the only person who might know what had really happened to Lucy. As the SUV turned onto the gravel road leading to Pineview, its headlights illuminated the modest building nestled among towering pines. A cold wind rustled through the trees, and Max suddenly perked up, letting out a short, sharp howl, an unmistakable warning. Rachel glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart pounding as she caught a fleeting shadow moving between the trees. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice tense. Sarah shook her head, but her grip on the photograph tightened as if it were her only talisman against the unknown. They stepped into Pineview's lobby, the air tinged with disinfectant and the heavy silence of a place where death was always lurking. A middle-aged nurse with an icy demeanor led them down a long corridor to room 214. "Mr. Mason is lucid today," she said flatly, "but don't agitate him. He doesn't have much time left." As the door swung open, Rachel felt her breath hitch. The man in the wheelchair by the window was a far cry from the strong firefighter he had once been. Jake Sullivan, now John Mason, was a frail shadow of himself, his hair stark white, his thin hands trembling on his lap. But his eyes, sharp and piercing blue, lit up the moment they fell on Sarah. "Lucy," he whispered, his voice hoarse with astonishment. The book in his hands slipped to the floor as he reached toward her, as if afraid she would vanish. Sarah stood frozen, her legs rooted to the spot, but Max lunged forward, placing his front paws on the wheelchair and pressing his head into Jake's hand. "Max," Jake murmured, tears spilling down his hollow cheeks. "You found her." Rachel stepped forward, her voice firm despite the chaos in her chest. "You're Jake Sullivan, aren't you? You know what happened that night." Jake nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Sarah. "I'm her uncle. Mark, my brother, called me that night, panicked. He said someone was threatening his family, something to do with his work at the prosecutor's office. He was investigating Oakridge Timber, a criminal syndicate disguised as a lumber company. They knew he had evidence and they came to silence him." Sarah took a shaky step forward. "You saved me?" Jake nodded, pain etched deep in his features. "When I got there, the fire had already consumed the lower floors. I found you in your room, unconscious from the smoke, with Max standing guard beside you. Helen, Mark, Ethan, they were already gone. I had just enough time to carry you out through the back door and flee into the woods before they saw me." He inhaled sharply. "I took you to a hospital in Idaho under a false name. But 3 months later they found me in Wyoming. I was shot twice, barely survived. I knew if I kept you with me they wouldn't stop hunting us. So I created Sarah Jennings, a child orphaned in a car crash, and placed you in the foster system. Then I disappeared, hoping they'd chase me instead of you." Sarah collapsed into the chair beside him, Max pressing against her leg as if sensing the storm of emotions within her. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you let me believe I had no past?" Jake took her hand, his skin icy cold. "Because if they knew you were alive, they'd kill you to erase every trace of Mark's evidence. I hid it, the documents he left behind, in a place only you would remember." "Where?" Rachel demanded, urgency in her voice. Jake gave a weak smile, a final glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "The treehouse in the old oak on Pine Hollow Lane. You used to hide your treasures there, Lucy, shiny rocks and ribbons. I placed the evidence in a metal box beneath a loose floorboard." Before Sarah could react, Max let out a low growl, fur bristling, eyes locked on the window. Rachel turned, and her breath caught when she saw a black SUV with no license plates pulling into the staff parking lot. 2 figures stepped out, one of whom she recognized instantly, the man who had visited the clinic days ago, claiming to be a distant Dawson relative. "Michael Reed. We need to go." "Now," Rachel hissed, pulling Sarah to her feet. Jake grasped Sarah's hand one last time, his voice urgent. "Find the evidence, Lucy. It will expose the man behind everything, Victor Grayson, the true mastermind of Oak Ridge Timber. He's still alive. And he won't stop." Rachel shoved Sarah through the side exit, Max sprinting beside them, but as they burst into the rain-soaked night, a gunshot rang out, splintering the doorframe inches from her head. The downpour blurred their vision as they leapt into the SUV, Rachel slamming the gas pedal. Tires screeched against gravel as they sped into the darkness. In the back seat, Max barked furiously and Sarah clutched the family photo, her voice barely a whisper. "He knows I'm alive." Rachel glanced at the rearview mirror. The black SUV was right behind them. "He won't let us escape that easily." They reached 1723 Pine Hollow Lane in the pounding rain. The abandoned lot loomed like a forgotten graveyard, and the ancient oak stood sentinel, the old treehouse still clinging to its branches like a ghost of the past. Rachel climbed first, testing each rotting step before signaling for Sarah to follow. Max stayed below, growling warily. Inside the treehouse, Sarah knelt in the far corner, prying at a loose floorboard with trembling fingers. She pulled out a rusted metal box, inside which lay a stack of yellowed documents, the irrefutable proof of Oak Ridge Timber's crimes. But their victory was short-lived. A gunshot cracked below and headlights swept over the treehouse. "I know you're up there," Michael Reed's voice called, cold and menacing. "Come down or I shoot the dog first. Then you." Max lunged at a shadow in the darkness, and a scream of pain followed. Rachel tossed part of the documents down as a distraction. In the ensuing chaos, they scrambled down and sprinted toward the car just as sirens wailed in the distance. Tom Carver and his team, alerted by Edith, had arrived. The standoff ended in rain and blood. Reed was cuffed, his accomplice lay motionless, and Victor Grayson's name was finally exposed. Sarah stood amidst the ruins of her past, Max by her side. "I remember now," she whispered. "I remember being Lucy. But Lucy died with them that night. I don't know who I am anymore." Rachel knelt beside her, offering silent companionship in the rain. As dawn broke, they drove away, carrying the truth and their scars into an uncertain future, where from the ashes something new might yet bloom.